have just to practice a bit.
Just to practice
English,
a bit of English, so you're on the train.
Better because it's my Breton is coming now. Comes now. Ik ken toch haar Breton, zo dan. En ik is, it's not easy to to speak English with you.
Switch.
It's not that natural.
Yeah. So we need to be on
So
on the rail.
Better to begin with. It's my M pen, which is switching a bit.
Between both.
The idea to speak, there's something funny about my name, Alan. I'm in my life, never an English speaker has said Alan, even Alan. They always English people or American people say Alan in French.
Yeah.
Because their brain is a brain working for French things, European things, continental Europe things, and so they cannot put the name Alan, which is for them something from the British Isles, things like that, and they cannot pronounce Alan for me. They always say, they ever say Anna in French.
But they know Alan, they have Alan as well in
No, but for them I'm French, so I cannot be called Alan.
Well, they know at least that you're Alan in the Harp world. They know you're Alan Stivell.
Well, there's something also about the pronunciations, for example, is that everybody everywhere say in English would say Stivell, Alan Stivell, which is Stivell. Not in genetic, but in my region it's Stivell. It's not Stivell.
With a straight.
In genetic we would say Stivell. Mais Stivell, non?
Bah, votre Stivell est Talpondi.
Yeah, Stivell.
Stivell, donc Marseille.
Yeah. Coming back to Breton, it's the same. I don't like to say either American or English. Are you a Breton? So they take a French accent to make the difference with the British or Britain.
Usually, when I speak, I have to say I'm Breton, and I
French accent?
like a bit with a French accent, because if I say I'm Breton, they're going to understand you're Britain.
Yeah, but in fact, I don't accept. In fact,
okay.
I don't accept to say to express an idea that to accept the idea that I would be French. In fact, because in their mind, I'm French. It's why they say Breton with a French accent to express the idea that Britain is part of France. So it's difficult for me to accept that idea, and I think that. Never mind if they think it's from Britain, it's not a problem, because they have to think a bit more. But that's all. Yeah.
So
is it
it's recording. Yes,
it's in running already.
It's already. Let me check.
So you can do another. You can do another. What you say, broadcasting. You can use the first phrases I said for another interview.
For another interview.
For another newspaper. Or
so you're done for
social politics, or I don't know.
Yes. So Alan, you just started to talk about your father and the making of the harp that you've seen when you were 9 years old.
Yeah.
And then what happened? The harp was made in front of you, and how did you start?
I was a child. I was 8 years old when my father decided, in fact, to make this. Some Irishman would beat his 14 bloody cassette harp. But it was so long a time that the poets in Brittany were using the word harp, harmonic harp, Celtic harp, not Breton harp, Brittany's harp, and nobody was really thinking, but well, that harp at last will exist or not, will take life. In fact, I have to say, will be alive.
Will bring life to the instrument.
And my father, after years of thinking of that, saying, I'm going to make this harp, because it's true that in the beginning of the 20th century, there have been two persons who have done something for the Celtic harp in Brittany. Was Paul Odiveres, who was living in Britain, in Wales, I think, and he was coming while to while, and with his wife, and coming with a classic harp or Celtic harp. I don't know very much, Irish harp, and so there was also Eloisa Ferguson, from Scotland, who was coming from time to time. And at last, a bit before the last war, Gilbert Jaffrenou began to make a harp, and he said himself that he was not good, and so he burned the harp even.
His first harp.
So in fact, there are some things which happened, but we had no result in a way, because the result would be, we cannot speak of a renaissance of the Celtic harp, because there's no renaissance, because they're just occasionally people coming, but there's no result, in fact, because nobody is coming to ask for lessons. Nobody is going to ask to make harp, and so there's no how do you say, spreading of the instrument at all. In fact, before last war, in fact, and so when my father made this idea to make a harp which should be, in fact, so beautiful and so good a harp. In fact, the idea to use is knowledge in science and techniques and so on, to make, without having been taught how to do a harp. He just practiced making a violin and making a guitar, but he was very clever about making things, invent things, and so on, and in very different fields. And that he made all these knowledge to try to make a harp which would be the absolute harp. In fact, which would be a kind of Stradivarius harp, so that the harp would be so good and so nice to look at, that it would be, everybody would want to play it, and so on. And that happened. That happened first on me. In fact, the first impact was on me, because as a child, I'd been 8 years old, I look at the harp being made, and more and more it was more and more made. It was more and more achieved. And I was looking at this harp, which was taking form and taking life in a way. It took life, of course, when the first string was put on in April or March 1953. And then I was 9 years old, and after 1 year of work for my father, because it was just a hobby, so just time to time, every day, but every evening, every Sunday, every Saturday. And so 1 year of work by my father, making carves all around the harp. And then the first string put on the harp, the sound was angel sound, something fantastic. It was really the best, a perfect sound, a perfect paradise sound. And so I was taken by that really as something coming back from a link with the ancient ages towards now, and I felt that feeling then, and so for me it was obvious that I wanted to have some more, to find a teacher, because no more tradition in Brittany, of course, because it was centuries that that the Celtic harp was not played. That it would be a long story to make a. It's not the time to make a conference about what is Celtic or Breton or in the harp or not. It's not the subject, I think. But the thing is that this Celtic harp impressed myself so much that I asked for a teacher, but the teacher was a classic harp teacher, Denise Méjean. And so with my father, they made my father was advising her about the modality of the Breton music, of the Celtic music, because of course, which was special in my, as you say, education, is that after having played the piano, so a bit of classical music, in fact, it was the idea of making already a kind of fusion of the music of the Celtic nations all around. So it's perhaps the only case where that a child was educated in the fusion of the Celtic cultures of all the nations, of the Celtic nations, because I played the Breton tunes, Breton songs, Breton hymns, Breton guairs, Breton and the Celtic, Irish, Scottish, Welsh tunes, and the arrangements. So it becomes, as I said, and became something obvious that there was and there is a Celtic music. Like we said, I had the feeling that it was something common between all this, and the idea, it was what I was saying.
But the Celtic ideas of
so there was the idea of the Celtic harp, but also the idea of the Celtic music
and the modal music.
Yeah. And what I was going to say is about education.
So you just mentioned Denise Méjean. You learned with her, but was she interested already by?
So Denise Méjean wrote arrangements, and I was how do you say, the cobaye,
the guinea pig.
The
guinea pig.
Okay. Of her about to practice arrangements, to play the arrangements, and so the first time I played on stage was for a conference that was made by Denise Méjean in Paris, and I played at the end, and so the people in the hall was enthusiastic because of perhaps the beauty of the instrument itself, even to look at, but also the sound of this instrument. A child playing on this harp was something of course charming, obviously, and so everybody was enthusiastic, and everybody wanted to make this harp a revival, and what was why, for example, people from Blaymore, the Blaymore community, this association of Scout boys and girls, wanted also to have their girls playing the Celtic harp, and so
we're jumping back to 1953.
If we are in the first year already, and the two first years, so 1953, 1954, 1955, we already, my father and me went to different places in schools, in the cathedral in Vannes, and then in San Malo and different places when people began to be enthusiastic for the instrument, and then people wanted my father to make other harps. He made harps, in fact, helped by menuisier, ébéniste.
Wood carpenter.
Yes, carpenters, to make even series, des séries de harp. Sets of harps, and so the different types that sold to different people in different places, in Redon, in San Malo, in Pontivy, and
different Breton towns.
Other people, as in Nantes, were also beginning to play to play the Celtic harp, made by other people, and more and more, in fact, this, if we go, I played even in the Paris Olympia, first part of Lino Renaud. You might know this French singer who came often in America in the past. And so at the end of the 50s, in fact, so it was already, this revival of the Celtic harp was something already there. In fact, it was something which was totally utopic. And when we're speaking, it's a bit long. I'm a bit too long, no?
No, not at all. I could listen to you
am I not?
All the day.
You know that before there was composers at Gérard Penven, for example, that we know, Paul Leclerc, another classical composer in Brittany, we were totally not against, but in fact against the idea that it was possible, in fact, because they were something totally utopical. How could an instrument coming from Middle Ages, in a way, revive in a Brittany of the 20th century? In fact, in a time that these composers were composing harmonies, very complicated harmonies and things like that. How could it be possible to use half a diatonic, half chromatic instrument, and so on? So they were totally, they had no confidence about a future for this instrument. And and in fact, that came into a reality at the end of the 50s. And at the end of the 50s, there were everywhere in Brittany, there were already people beginning to play the Celtic harp, people making harps, Celtic harps. And so that was something, as you would say, installed.
Installed.
Yeah.
Or launched.
Yeah.
Something launched.
Yeah.
A bit like a fashion. In fact, you started the fashion of people wanting to.
A fashion it's a bit too big to speak of fashion. But in this movement, which was this kind of first revival after the war, which was a general cultural revival, were mainly based on the bagadou, which is the Breton pipe bands. All around this Breton pipe band, there was things happening. There was the fest-nose beginning, with the canadiscan, the traditional singing for dancing. There was what's called Celtic circles, the folklorical groups of dancers, and all this was going up in these 50s. And it was in that movement that my father made this harp and made this Celtic harp revival happen. At the same time, you know, I think you know that in other Celtic countries it was not that. It was, of course, it was not as extinguished as it was in Brittany, of course, in Ireland, even in Scotland. But it's true that there was almost no more anybody was playing, for example, harp as a Celtic Irish harp as a solo instrument. For example, it was just you were singing with a harp, and it was not that considered in that time. In fact, in the early 50s, and we met in fact, different people as Roshini Hare, Roshini Tuama. In the same time, of course, you know that there was a Mary O'Hara who was that American-Irish woman who was, to my knowledge, the only professional woman singing and playing with an Irish harp. And so it was not dead, but it was not very alive, in fact, in Ireland, even less in Scotland, and in a way, even less in Wales, as in Wales, of course, what we call the Celtic harp was not, there was not at all, there was only this, the classical harp, and there was even, I don't know even if it was anybody beginning to play the tribal harp and things like that in the early 50s, I don't know. Bowen began and much later. And in fact, so the relation also we had with this Irish family, which especially the Otuama in Dublin. Also we met Scottish people, and so in a Celtic festival as in Brest. Made also this perhaps how you could say crystallizing the beginning of something, not only in Brittany but even in the other countries. Because I think of course, so I can say that we have a cross influences, because there are the influence, of course, the influence of mainly the Irish, Ireland, Scotland was so important for us in Brittany, but perhaps also that the revival in Brittany what helped, in fact, something a little bit for the Irish and Scots to make more alive also the harp in their countries. It's a long story.
It's a long story, yes,
Yeah.
but I could listen to you all the day, so it's okay. Maybe, well, this as a harp player, I always see you on stage with harps, always, and of course, but we shouldn't forget that you also play the pipes. It's something very important for you. And what about the relation? Do you think pipes and harp were they complementary for you, or is it something totally different, for instance?
In fact, of course, I fall in passion not only with the Celtic harp, but also with the Celtic culture in general. And so I was almost kind of radical about this culture. And so I wanted to know everything possible, but not only the music, but I began to learn Breton language, but also to have initiation in the other Celtic languages, and also, of course, mythology, history, drawings, Celtic drawings. So everything which was Celtic was something so important, and this has been all my life, in fact, very central. And of course, the bombard first in Brittany, later the Breton hobo, as you know, the Scottish bagpipe, and in a way the singing, in a way, because I had in the ears also how was sung the chameaux. All this culture, or this musical culture, has been very important even in my playing the Celtic harp itself, and also in my singing, because when I sing, in fact, you can hear something coming from the bagpipe. And it's not only sometimes something even in ornamentation, phrasing, and even of course even the intervals, because of course the bagpipe, but also the bombard, so and of course the chameaux help to understand better, in fact, the other tempered scales, in fact, which are not the classical scales, which is not that obvious on the harp because it's not that easy to tune a harp in different scales. But in fact, it's what the more important is maybe in the phrasing, because for me the more important in music is the interpretation, in fact, because what gives an identity to the music it's an interpretation, because in fact on any kind of music you can interpret it and make your identity, your nationality in a way expressed by the interpretation. And the Celtic phrasing, because I assume that there's a Celtic phrasing which is something which is rubato, a special type of rubato, which is this is very important to learn the singing, the traditional singing, and also I think that the bagpipe helps also to understand better also that all that, which is not that obvious when you play only the harp, because the harp will the chords and so on could have an influence on how do you say, could alourdir
make it heavier.
Alourdir the
Make it heavier.
rhythm.
Yeah.
Heavier.
Make it heavier.
Make heavier, in fact, make too much on the beat, you know, the music itself. Mm-hmm. And so I learned, so perhaps I will go to later, I can go to later periods, in fact, because I was directly going to I was in the interpretation, and for example, there's something that I knew I've discovered later is the guitar flat picking. Mm-hmm. I can't play the guitar myself, but I discovered played by other people, and I wanted to adapt the flat picking on the harp. Mm-hmm. And so I discovered that doing the flat picking with two hands, of course, on the harp, then I was coming back to the African kora style technique, something similar to it. And this use of this picking on the harp, I think is something very good, because it helps to have at the same time, to have two rhythms, superposed rhythms. And
kind of polyrhythmic approach.
Sorry?
The kind of polyrhythmic approach.
Yeah, polyrhythmic approach, which in fact help to have at the same time a square beat in a way. I don't know how to say that. Together with the melody, which can be totally free and totally rubato. And this is very, very important, because for Catholic music, because if there is a culture and a music which is against things which are too much on the beats, we can have beats, but the melody can be out of the beat together. And this way of being polyrhythmic is very important, I think, and helps very much the Celtic interpretation to be there. But perhaps I can come back now to this kind of chronology, because I was ending this 50s, but the rock and roll came. Yes. In Europe, yes. Because later than in America. And so we are in the late 50s when the rock and roll and the electric guitar, all this is coming. And I'm very enthusiastic for that, because before I was not more in the idea of your fusion of classical and Celtic music. And rock and roll arriving, I was enthusiastic because there was, for the first time, there was in the radios and places like that, in the cinema, because the music or the Western, thing like that, even before, even Negro spirituals and things like that, were things which are a little bit more cousins with Celtic music. Mm-hmm. And all this American music, of course, is something which was not especially jazz music, because the jazz music has developed things which are often very far from my culture, and even Celtic music, because but the rock and roll, blues even, and other forms of music which became fashionable, in fact, were coming back to pentatonic, to modal music, things like that, and things which are much closer to us in a way. And so music. I was very enthusiastic to that, because it was just appealing to me, but also thinking that my generation could be easier for my generation to go to our culture, because the fashionable culture, music in the radios were a little bit closer to us. And
so the link came straight away when you...
And so around mid-1960, in fact, I had in mind that it should be Britain had to create bands which would be as the Shadows, the Beatles later, or bands like that, which would do the fusion between rock and roll and Celtic music and Breton language. But of course, I was only 16 years old, and so that was still just an idea. And it came some years before the mid-60s when I was in Paris. I was a student, and I came to the American Center for Students and Artists who made who made evenings, singing evenings on this, each Tuesday. And
kind of open stage.
Well, yes, and so I went there and sang a song and another song the week after. And so in fact, I created my repertoire there, in fact, before even experimenting it in Britain itself. I began to sing in Paris in 1966. And before there was no, I had it in mind, but I had no idea how I could became professional and even singer. I wanted to sing, but how I could begin, by where,
So you were a pioneer.
Where, and so it's difficult to believe that our culture was rejected in that time, in fact, and so it's difficult in that time to imagine a man who would go to a cabaret in Pigalle or somewhere else who would say, "I'm singing Breton."
Nobody would believe that.
He used to go into the hospital, rather. He must go to a hospital. And,
psychiatric hospital.
So it began to be possible by chances like that. In fact, I've got many good chances in my life. That was a big chance, in fact, that Lionel Rochman, who was managing this evening there, that helped me very much, because even singing in that place, there was some people coming from the radios, for example, from journalists, people like that, who invite me to go in the Radio France. Then some Italian asked me to invite me to sing in Italy in July '66, already outside the French borders. And so things began very quickly, very fast.
Yeah, somehow they were ready for that.
And in 1 year after, I had already signed. I was signed by Universal, by Philips, called Philips in that time. So my contract 1 year after began. Just very, very quickly.
So you were 23, yeah.
I began at 22.
26, you said?
And in 23, of course, when I had my contract in the pocket. But
it was something unbelievable.
Sorry?
Somehow it was unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable, yes, because
for that time.
I was invited to play in '68. I played in London, Queen Elizabeth Hall, first part of the Moody Blues, who was a very big #1 pop band in the world. And so things happened very, very quickly. And so it was in that American Center. So I played also, of course, in different places, in Brittany, of course, and elsewhere, and in the French MJCs, youth places.
Young place, yeah.
So very quickly, I had already an audience, not only in Brittany, but also in France, and even a little bit elsewhere. And so it was in the American Center. I was speaking with the flat picking, for example. It was of the thing I learned, in fact, in places like that, which that also influenced me very much in my technique, in my playing. And so perhaps coming back to the harp itself, to the playing of the harp, you were speaking of the backpack and things like that. The backpack and the Celtic music in general have something which is very important, the drone. And the metal strings harp, which was the harp I began to play more than the other at that time, coming from beginning in the mid-60s, in fact, for 30 years, in fact, I almost no more played the nylon strings harp. I played only, almost only metal strings harp. The wire strings harp. And, but the wire strings harp, in fact, we can, of course, as you say, étouffer les cordes.
Damping?
Yeah, but it's so nice to be it's so hypnotic to play with the resonances, which are sometimes that's a sophisticated drones in a way. So I created my own type of harmonization, in fact, by using these resonances and things like that. So it was because all my life I didn't want, for example, to go to the conservatory.
Yes.
Conservatory, because I didn't want to. I just went to schools normally, but in fact, my actual school was at home. In fact, with the books of my fathers, where the music. Of course, I had some classical teaching, but in fact, I wanted to go to something very, very Celtic, and to go to conservatory, I had in the idea that I would be too much influenced, and I would lose the originality of my culture, and so why was I saying that? That to say that in fact I developed even a kind of a personal harmonization. In fact, which is something which is not totally classic, which would be a kind of mix, even of almost closer to, perhaps sometimes it will be closer to Indian music than to classical music, for example. And I think that my way I developed the harmony could be the way that some Indians which develop harmony if they want to, and which is naturally something different from classical music. And so, in fact, to come back to chronology, to history in a way, in 72, so I had
maybe
this
71?
Sorry?
Maybe 71 first?
Out of 71 first, yeah.
But that's your jubilee for the... That's what we're very interested in, it's the renaissance of the Celtic harp.
Yeah, because we have my first professional album, Reflections in 70, we have already present different receipts of music, in fact, on that album to show to people that you can, in fact, there's something also pedagogical in my work, in fact, is to make people sensible to that, and perhaps some people will be more together with one experiment more than another. And so I feel very important to present different approaches, so that perhaps, which myself I love things which are
360 degrees.
Yeah. So I love everything, in fact, any kind of music, because I love the music of the world, of humanity, of mankind. So, but in that music, I think that if I present all these type of musics, or these approaches, I can also perhaps have some people will be more into one aspect of the music, and so if something is more rock and roll, we have the electric guitar in one tune. Perhaps somebody will be more enthusiastic for that. Another will be more enthusiastic for the bombard and organ. I don't know, or something acoustic, something more electric, something more traditional, or something less traditional. And so for me, it was important to show how an infinity of possibilities is there, and so that the idea for my albums in general, in a way, made and my first album, Reflections, and then the idea was together to go to two very opposite directions together. About the direction which was very popular, very dancing, very feisty, very rock in a way, Celtic rock, or Celtic folk rock, which was the Olympia concert, that was a live concert and live album in. But just before, I released Renaissance of the Celtic Harp, which has a totally different approach, which was I was in a way taking advantage of being already in a way beginning to be popular, to make many people involved and interested by this instrument, which was so important for me, which is still so important, so central. So there was this album, which was no singing, which was dedicated to the harp, the different forms, different approaches also, because it's also mainly with metal strings, but also a little some tunes, some music also on my Telengenta, on my first Celtic harp, and
on nylon strings.
And nylon strings, which in fact. I think that interested people a little bit everywhere. In fact. Mm-hmm. So it was dedicated to the instrument. Mm-hmm. So I was very happy that that it had been.
So
it was. There's something funny in that that people from very different fields, even I met. Rock musicians, sometimes punk rock musicians, which came to in the record company to say, "Oh, I want this album." Mm. It was funny because people from the rock scene or people from the cinema scene, people were very how do you say, warm with that music. Because for me, which is the more magical, it's not my playing. Is the sound of the instrument, mm-hmm. Because I think there's something which is at the same time I can say two things. It's the sound, and in my playing it will be the feeling of something which is out of the beat. I don't know how to say that. It's a bit something. What I try to do is go in levitation. That the music itself in levitation.
Okay. Yeah, out of beat. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the correct word. Yeah, out of beat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this album is only instrumental as well.
Yes.
Compared to the Olympia concert where you sing.
The other concert and it's the main. I think that I love at the same time think which could be considered to be to less people. But I like to spread also my love for Brittany, for the Celtic culture, to the maximum of people. Mm-hmm. Because there's the big problem, we are a bit as the American Indians, in fact. With they were les derniers des Mohicans.
The last of the Mohicans.
The last of the Mohicans, and the last of the Bretons. Uh-huh. And the last of the Bretons was something which was close, how do you say, in a close future. It was if we were not struggling, mm-hmm. It was something we were close to death, in fact.
So for the language and the culture.
Yeah, for the language and so on. So it's very important to make millions of people to be on the TV shows and places like that, so that in a short time that millions of people could be in contact with this culture. Mm-hmm. Right? It was so important. But at the same time, of course, so that if you listen to a record as the Olympia live concert, I think it's very, very easy to be in because it's something very dancing and so on. And but that I love, of course, that so older pieces could be a little bit more, in a way, could be more sophisticated, mm-hmm. More quieter. More ethereal, more poetic, mm-hmm. And but I think that a human being must express himself in total, in fact, all his moments, which are sometime perhaps an album as this would have been less impact if I had not made an album at the Olympia, of course.
They were both complementary.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, because I see regularly on stage or on video you have different harps, and as a harp player had a very stupid question: is how many harps do you have?
I have about 20, yeah, because I always have in mind new harps, and that my father made my first, of course, the second metal strings harp, but then he died in '74, and I was already beginning to do. I began to do electric harps in the late 50s. So, but who would have in mind to make it at that time? Nobody at all. And so I had to wait more. And when my father died, I had already drawn a new harp, and I found two people made it. My first harp, and metal strings, but bigger than the Baltic harp. And later I had different people. I changed the harp itself, the shape, and so on. And more and more I went into electroacoustic harps, and I had in mind, of course, also the solid bodies harps, because because that I began to draw much earlier, in fact, and so I had other harps that each prototype I find somebody to make it, but different people often. Perhaps the main one has been Le Govic, who has made, for example, this fabulous crystal harp with this plexiglass aluminium harp, solid body, with for the first time with guitar and bass keys, with many piezo strings, which I could use because Kamak had begun to make also electro harp about the same time, because when Kamak made its first one, it was after a discussion I had with Joël Garnier. By that I had only a first prototype which I almost could not play. In fact, before in the early 80s, and so there are different harps. Every 2 years, I think like that, there's some improvements. Have improvements in the harps, changing piezos. What is very interesting in this harp world and this harp for the instruments themselves, for the luthiers, is that everybody built something together. In fact, an idea of somebody helps somebody else. The idea I had when I had made this first prototype of a solid body harp, as I speak with Joël Garnier, who made one, asked to Japanese people to make special piezos. Then Joël Garnier permit me to use their own piezos for the harp, which was made by the Uruguays. Then somebody else, of course. So everything is and for example, my last harp has been made with the help with Vincenzo Citello, who advised me about new piezos, which are RCM, new piezos, which are much better than the piezos I used for the harp before. And so on each harp there's progression because the idea is for me, you were speaking of 20 harp, or I was speaking of 20 harp, but in fact on stage the idea is to try to have one harp making everything. So the idea is trying to have this harp which can make a very pure sound, uh, although being amplified, but to have something very crystalline. At the same time, that of course, with solid bodies harp, we can use it as an electric harp, as something very electric with a distortion and everything you want. And so for me, of course, it's very important to that on the same harp you can do any kind of music. It's very important.
What would you say to the young generation of harp players? And what can they do? Because at your time you were kind of the pioneer in doing what you were doing. How would you reproduce that nowadays, to be pioneer in a different style? What would you tell them, the young generations?
You know, I think that everybody can, having different people as you, are different. So everybody can build different things. That is very important. And different from what I do myself. That's very important because the diversity, the richness of the harp world is made by different personalities. So of course, everybody has to develop in himself different ways. And of course, I've always been, as you say, porté vers porté.
Brought to something.
Yes, by originality. In fact, I think that all the time I try to do something else that somebody else have not made. In fact, in a way, or even myself, I've never made before. I think that of course it's how the field of music can develop is that in that way. In fact, and so it's what is how it's important that everybody develop its own field, because of course this makes everything so rich. This is very important. And the second thing very important for me is, of course, as I said from the beginning, is that that of course if I play the Celtic harp, it's not only for the harp itself, it's also because I love the Celtic culture and the fact. So I think that the Celtic culture is very important. Every culture is very important, but nobody will how do you say? Nobody will help more than us, our culture.
Nobody will defend your culture.
Our culture, and I think that Celtic culture has things which are very interesting. Is that as being at the same time one foot in the Western world, but one foot in the rest of the world. In fact, because the Celtic music itself is not totally Western. There's something so ancient in the memory, recollecting with the very far past, even before the Celts, and that this archaism, in fact, make us closer to the other people of the planet, and it's why American Indians, Barbarian in Africa, Tibetan, everybody on the planet for cultures which are very far from us geographically, feel very easy to go to us, in fact, to come to us. So, and we come very easily to other people. And so there's something, I think that the Celtic music and culture is federating many people because very close to the other peoples. And without this kind of imperialism that make the big empires are spreading their own culture because of their power, their economic power, their political power, and the Celtic culture spread just fraternity.
Well, I think that's a nice word to finish this interview. Thank you, Alan, for that. And
thank you, Tristan.
You're very welcome, and thank you. Congratulations.
And,
have it for the
And
award.
again, thank you very much, because for me it's something fantastic to even perhaps to have even more. I want even more to make because of your award. I want to play more. I want to play better, and to even to spread to be one of the people who can spread again and again this music.
Terug naar je vraag. Thank you.
Obrigado.